We are live.
I'll tell you when we go.
We are live on StreamYard. Welcome everybody to tonight's Truth Proof. We've got a great guest on tonight, as you can see, and Paul will introduce him later on. First of all, I'll just do a little bit of a name check here and see who's in the stream. Got to thank you everybody for coming on to tonight's stream, because we know you've got plenty to do, your grass cutting and watch some of the Netflix and all that, but it's great that you're on here, by the way. I've got to say, Tino's in the room tonight and he's looking forward to this. Welcome, Tino. Nancy Brown, Joan Thomas, Simon C. Riley, Scarflower, our co-moderator, is in the stream. And we have Alison Butler, who's doing the main moderating for tonight. Welcome, Alison, and thank you very much. We have Steph J. Just going through the list. Tony Worrell and Barbara Davis. And scrolling down and down and down. Nicknames in the chat tonight. Alien Woods. Steve 071, welcome to the show. And the Revenants, welcome. Philip Young, Lee Roscoe, great supporter of the show. Welcome to the show, Lee. Hope you enjoy it tonight. Rocky Newsons is in, and I think if I missed anybody out, I apologise, because now we're just going to hand over to Paul to introduce the guest.
Thank you very much, Les. And here we are again. Another week's come round, and yeah, as Les said, we've got a fabulous guest tonight who I'm really looking forward to speaking to. Over the years, I've spoke to David, and his absolute wealth of knowledge. Just first a little bit about him. I mean, and we could go on for 15 minutes, but we're not going to do. So, writer, researcher of the unexplained. More importantly, I think David's well known for his work within the animal fatalities. World renowned, I would say. I don't think that's anything that's not true. But David, in his early career, he joined the RAF. He later went on to work for British Aerospace. And like I said, also the co-founder of and I've got to say this right, the Animal Pathology Field Unit, along with Phil Hoyle. And I'm not going to labour on with more and more of these accolades, but David, welcome to Truth Proof. Really looking forward to this.
Yes, thank you very much, Paul. And thanks for everyone that's logged in. I hope you enjoy and find what I have to say of interest. So that's the main objective, is to get information out there. And I know many people who are watching are probably already into the subject and probably fairly well conversed in what's going on. So, okay.
I think they are, David. But you know, it's difficult to say experts within this field, but it's within the sort of spectrum of unexplained phenomena. You know, the UFOs, the cryptids, the actual animal fatalities is a little bit more niche than I would think some of the other parts of what we look into. So you're a specialist in that. But before we get to that, and we also need to say that anybody listening and viewing us tonight, some of the things that David will talk about are quite sensitive. So if you are a little bit squeamish, we're not showing no images, then just kind of be aware of that. But before we get to that, David, do you want to tell us a little bit about your early life and how you got interested in the unexplained?
I don't know what triggered it in the first place, but I always had a slight interest in UFOs and aliens, which was sort of on the back of my mind. And then when I was in the RAF, posted to Episcopi in Cyprus in 1957, something happened in 1958, which we'll go into shortly. And that really firmed up my interest and belief about the phenomena and the fact that we're not alone and so on. And then when I retired early from British Aerospace in 1993, that gave me some time to consider things to do in early retirement, and one of which I contacted Tony Dodd, at Quest International in Yorkshire, and said, do you want an investigator for the Greater Manchester area and the sort of northwest loosely? So I gave him my details and my background, and he said, yes, please, and signed me up prompto and gave me an ID card with a picture. But he didn't interfere, nor did Graham Birdsall. They left you to it.
Yeah.
But I reported back to interesting things to Graham and to Tony principally. And he would give me comment and support where necessary. So they didn't sort of hound you and badger you for stuff. They left it to you.
So in those early days then, David, I take it was the full spectrum of unexplained phenomena and not what you later became known for. Yes,
it was the first 3 years up to 1997. It was UFOs,
right?
Exclusively, pretty well. But then I filled in that many sighting reports for Tony and interviewed lots of people in the area. And there were very few who had pictures that was worth anything. So you usually I filled the report in, they filled their bits in, sent them off to Tony. So that's the end of it, really. You either believe the witness or you don't.
Yeah.
So there's no residual evidence. And that's what made me think, having learnt from Tony about some of the animal stuff and having met up in the crop fields of Wiltshire, Linda Moulton Howe, are already aware of her work in the subject and the documentaries and so forth. I decided that I'll be better off switching to looking at the animals' problems than talking to people about something they've seen in the sky which has come and gone.
Yeah.
And I thought, if there's residual evidence left on the ground, people, specialist people, pathologists, experts in veterinary people, if they're willing, which is a big if, to have a look at this evidence. And the thing they find, to me, was more conclusive evidence, albeit circumstantial, that we're not alone and we have extraterrestrials visiting this planet and doing things which are not too pleasant, to put it mildly.
Yeah.
Tony reckoned there were at least 30 species of aliens. Other people think there's a lot more than that. And some of them have probably got similar agendas or a mixture of the people that do the bad things to animals for perhaps different reasons. So there's no quick answer pat answer to say why this has been done.
Yeah.
But nevertheless, to me, the evidence was building up with every carcass we looked at to fit the bill, and made me convinced more than ever that we're not alone.
And did you find, David, that, well, just sticking to UFOs, but all of it really, that they all bled into one another, as in the subject? So, or you didn't just step away from the UFOs, I take it. You obviously realised, did you, that each was connected to each other in some inexplicable way?
Yes, we've got a case to mention later on of a lady in Aberdeenshire who lived at a parent's home. It used to be a farm, and she rented fields out to a farmer 5 miles away and had a sheep dead, and she looked at it and wrote letters. She never thought to take a picture.
Right.
But she's got some very good diagrams. She was a senior radiologist with the hospital in her past. So she didn't want to mention her name. She was keen on not that happening. And she'd seen some UFO activity about the time she found the sheep.
Right.
So that to me was on one case where there was a direct link with objects in the sky beaming beams down as it traversed across horizontally, fairly slow speed. So I thought it was a good case, even though we haven't got actual pictures of the animal.
No.
So I've got a large scale picture she did here. I can discuss later on.
Yeah. I don't think. Right. I see that, David. And maybe. Yeah.
I can read off the print.
That would be good. We'll come. I've just made a note. If you see me turn away, I'm just making little notes. Aberdeen, so we'll go back to that.
Yeah. Okay.
I noted British Aerospace.
Yeah.
There's probably nothing that you can tell us from there. But how did they view, or did they not even know about your interest?
Well, people close to me in the office, I was promoted in 1970 to head of non-destructive testing, if you know what that is.
No,
so
we
were part of the structural engineering department. It means where you develop radiographic, ultrasound, and other electronic methods for finding fatigue cracks and corrosion in the aircraft airframe and structures and components. And there was 6 or 7 of us in the office, and it was all treated a bit humorously, and they used to take the mickey a bit with what my interest was outside work.
Yeah.
But no one very senior, the front, what we call the front corridor, knew about it as far as I know, and if they did, they never said anything to me adversely to dissuade me from carrying on.
So
after all, a hobby.
So nobody ever came to you and just sort of said, "I've got something to tell you, David." I'd like, nothing like that.
Not in work, no.
No.
Not I can remember anyway. No.
Nice. Just it's fascinating. So, do you want to? You've probably got some more to say there, have you? Sorry.
About British Aerospace.
Yeah, have we wound that up, aerospace?
Yeah, I think so. I'll just quick look at my notes. No, I think that's it really.
So, do you want to wind us back to Cyprus then? And is it the 16th of August, 1958?
Yes, that
well,
was.
we can go in whatever order you want, David. But I'm just sort of firing that one at you. If you want to do that afterwards, it's up to you.
Yep. Yeah, I'll do that first.
Okay.
Yes, well, I worked at an outfit called JARIC at Middle East, which is a Joint Air Reconnaissance Intelligence Centre, which had quite a number of photographers. And then we have a radar site, which is still being used and still there on the top of Mount Olympus, which is the highest point in the Troodos Mountains, nearly 6,500 feet, roughly speaking. And for a period, they had to have a photographer on duty in the radar room, because at the time they were playing around with at the then top secret over the horizon radar system. So occasionally they wanted the screen photographed and what have you. So he took turns doing a stint of maybe a month up there before he came back to base. I never actually was there for a month. I went up twice with a Sten gun on my knee with a Cypriot taxi driver, taking fresh film and bringing exposed film back for processing. That was an experience, because they thought a private Cypriot taxi was safer than a military vehicle to reduce the risk of an ambush.
Right.
And the way this chap drove was pretty horrendous. Mountain twisted roads, no safety barriers. So in fact, I took the magazine off the stem because sharp jolts go off 18 rounds everywhere. I never told the bosses about it, I'd done that. But anyway, my friend, who actually, there's 8 of us in a barrack room, and Barry Porter was one of the 8, and he was on duty on that night of the 16th, 6 o'clock in the morning, and he heard there was like commotion in the radar room, gathered his camera together, expecting to have to photograph something, and he witnessed the carry on with this object they had on radar coming up from Alexandria in Egypt, up the Med, sort of between Crete and Cyprus, roughly speaking. At the time, it was doing 800 miles an hour. Radar can tell speed and heights quite well, but not very good on sizing. But this was must have been a big object, because at the same time, the radar controllers were talking to controllers RAF El Adam, which was near Tobruk in Libya, on their radar, and also in Malta, which is to the end of the Mediterranean. So they were comparing notes and tracking this thing. Anyway, after a while, it did a sharp turn of about 35 degrees without any loss of speed towards the western coast of Cyprus. And it was at 38,000 feet. They dispatched 2 QRA Hunter jets based in Nicosia, and QRA's quick reaction alert, which was Cold War time, was going on at the same time as the Yoka things going on, nasty things like that. So having the radar people talk to headquarters, they scramble these Hunter jets to try and intercept this object, which wasn't very successful. I never found out if the pilots actually saw the object and could describe it. They never come forward, at least not to my knowledge they hadn't. And as the 2 jet fighters approached, it stopped momentally. They're just a dead stop from 800 odd miles an hour. I don't know, and the turn must have pulled 150 Gs or so. And it jumped then to 60,000 feet in a click of the fingers. And the hunters couldn't reach that ceiling, so they had to go back to base. And as it left the spot, it picked up speed to 18,000 miles an hour, headed over the 40 miles of ocean between Cyprus and Turkey, across Turkey, and eventually into the Soviet Union and off my radar.
It's incredible.
By 8 o'clock in the morning, which is 2 hours after this event, the wing commander, some rank, drove the tortuous road up from Nicosia to the radar site. He lined everybody up, including Barry, and said, "Okay, lads, you've all signed the Official Secrets Act. You don't talk about anybody, and particularly not the media. Otherwise, you're in dead trouble." The usual spiel. So that was the end of that.
It's a pretty fabulous sighting stroke encounter, though, David. And when I mean, by today's standards, if you were telling that now in present day, people would be enthralled. That'd be, I think there's more interest there than the Tic Tac UFO. Yeah. It's spectacular.
What happened, which I didn't know about until I think 2000, 2001 maybe, the day before, 24 hours before, one of the RAF's Avro Shackletons, which was like an upgraded Lancaster thing, used to do coastal research and searches, I should say, and eventually drop things on submarines. But that had flown into Cyprus to Akrotiri from Lucca in Malta with a crew and a ground crew, which they left in Akrotiri. And their job was to fly slowly at lowish level all around the coast of Cyprus, looking for Greek gunboats, bringing in the illegal arms to arm the Yoka terrorism. That was what he was doing. Anyway, by end of the night, early morning, they'd finished. He went back to Akrotiri, picked up his ground crew, and they're flying back to Lucca in Malta. And they're just off Crete. And some of the people on board said, "Oh, there's an object keeping pace with us with a red light on the port side." Now, the captain, whose name was, he was also OC 38 Squadron at the time, Gordon Burgess, his name. He couldn't see because of the engines, this object. So on the top of the Shackleton, there's a viewing dome at the top. So he told them all one at a time to take turns to go and have a look at this thing. And then after they carried on, it's still pacing them. So he did an unconventional maneuver. He dived the Shackleton as best he could. I think there must have been about 6,000 or 7,000, 8,000 feet probably. It wasn't high, not pressurized or anything. And then he pulled the stick back fairly quickly, which meant he dropped speed a lot. And for a few seconds, he found himself behind this object. Right. And they could see it was a cylinder about 30 odd feet long, perhaps 12-foot diameter, with a pointed or slightly rounded pointed end with a red light on the nose. And within seconds, when he's speeding, he levelled off, the thing immediately jumped back to his port wing and where it was before. So he got on the secret NATO radio frequency, notified Malta what was happening, and they scrambled two Gloucester Javelins, night interceptors, which also on QRA standby. And after a due time, they approached at much higher altitude, and the crew could apparently see this object. It's now getting daylight. The dawn has approached on his port wing. And as soon as they got near it just shot upwards. And they had a different radar at Lucca, and they could tell this thing jumped to 60-odd thousand feet.
No signal, no power, and if you can see me,
I can see you. Yeah.
Well, that is great. What we're doing here?
You think there's been some interference because of what I'm saying?
That's it. All right, my screen went off then, guys. I don't know what happened. Can you hear me?
I can still see you.
Yeah. Did it stay on all the time, David?
Yes.
Oh, right. Apologies. Just went black and just nothing. So the Gloucester Javelins, and I know I've probably missed a portion of that, David.
Yeah, well, as they approached, the object just shot up vertically to over 60,000 feet in seconds and away. So I don't believe it was the same object that was picked up on radar the day before. The day after.
So that's just coincidence then, in your opinion?
Yeah, I think it was an entirely different object.
Well, yeah, got you.
That's my belief anyway, purely from the radar returns.
With you having such a long history and time within the subject, David, what do you think to explanations and how they've changed over years to explain away, like we would have said weather balloons, whereas now they're not used as a staple explanation? What have you any views on that?
Not really.
No.
I think they've run out of excuses. Basically.
That's good enough. That's what I'm thinking. Yeah, because it sounds to me 1958, and you're describing these objects, and it could be the same thing that's described in 2023, and we're not using the same explanations for them, are we?
No, as far as I know, all air forces around the world, in countries like Iraq, have had encounters, both visuals and radar, with UFOs, and it's still going on.
Yeah.
So.
And David, have you any more UFO cases that interest you that you want to touch on? Or
Yes, I mean it. I've just mentioned Gordon Burgess. In 2001, he left the service, promoted to group captain, and he had a CBE, so no slouch. And he was doing a talk in Staffordshire on his RAF experiences. He'd had lots of postings to Washington, D.C. He'd had liaisons with Russian Air Force people of rank about UFOs as well as anything else, really? Which he ended up disclosing in this talk. And he said he stopped midway, and one of the people in the audience was a fellow called Graham Allen, who was the chairman of SUFOG, which is Staffordshire UFO Group. And he said, "I'm so fed up of the ridicule from the media, particularly about this subject. I'm going to tell you this." So that's how it came to light.
I see.
So there we have a man of senior rank, of air rank. No, not quite air rank, but next rank he would have been air officer rank. Came out with all that. So I just thought I'd let you know that.
Well, it's interesting, and it makes you wonder how many more higher up the chain know these things and don't want to speak about them, and it's denied. Maybe, do you think the public needs to be denied the truth?
I don't think so. I think, particularly these days, people are more open-minded. They're more used to things on the media, spooky things. I don't think they're as sensitive as they were in the 1950s, to be honest.
No.
Some people might argue they're better not knowing. Ignorance is bliss and all that. because all this stuff impacts religious organisations, things in the Bible. Never mind the excuse of security that the Ministry of Defence and other people put on about it. So, on balance, I think people should know, because come the day there could be something really serious happens, and people need to be ready for it and warned that we're not alone in the universe. Never mind this planet.
Well, good point.
And there are more intelligent beings out there, have been perhaps for thousands of years, who have got capabilities which is beyond our dreams at the moment. So there we go.
Yeah, and now just before we leave UFOs, we might come back to it eventually, and I'm not expecting you to have an answer. I don't know, but you said you worked with Tony Dodd on quite a number of cases. Did you have anything to do with the XS894, the Lightning that crashed in 1970?
No. I only knew about that from Tony. Foxtrot 94, yes.
Yeah. I did a little bit of work with Tony on it, and
yes,
still
happened.
Yeah, literally 4 miles away. Yeah,
Yes.
Obviously 15 miles off coast that it went down, but September 8th, 1970, and it's still really sensitive. And I think they've extended the ruling, and I think it's another 73 years. Somebody might correct me, but that these papers and these documents with information regarding XS are being held for something that's of no defence significance, something that never happened, something that's not UFO related, but we've extended it. I mean, I don't know. It just begs the question.
Well, if memory serves me right, and you can prompt me, I believe Tony thought that's lightning, wasn't it?
Lightning, yeah.
English electric lightning was actually chasing a UFO off the coast of the North Sea.
That's correct, off Flamborough Head.
Yeah, and for some reason, this American pilot was on base, and he jumped the queue of other pilots and pushed people out of the way to jump in the cockpit. I don't know whose authority he was doing that on, but he took off instead of everybody else. Anyway, he mysteriously ended up in the sea. And when they found on the search, they found the cockpit was open, wasn't it?
That's correct.
But he wasn't in the seat initially. I think that's right.
That's right. And there were so many other contributing things. I mean, first of all, we've no proof that it's alien related. I'm quick to say that, but there's a lot of proof to say highly unusual things were taking place, David, around that time. For instance, a few days before, I haven't got the exact dates in here at the moment, but an RAF Marine launch based at Bridlington was just on the edge of the bay close to Flamborough Head, and it struck an unknown submerged obstacle. And the guy in charge of the captain of the boat said that they were clear of anything. There were no known obstacles, and he tore a 25-foot by 12-inch hole in its hull, which it had to be beached on North Beach. That were only days before the Lightning, allegedly pursuing the UFO, went down. Days after it went down, the Lightning, a speedboat 6 miles away at Barmston, wife watching on the shore, husband and small children in the boat. She said they weren't going that fast. Hit something beneath the surface and disintegrated. That's the words. And they were picked up by a pleasure cruiser called the Glen Rose. Years later, I managed to... Newspapers of the day, David, as you know, they gave away lots more information back then. So they said where this guy lived and everything. So I managed to trace the Sun all those years later from 1970. Needless to say, he didn't want to really discuss anything about it. I think he was probably shocked that somebody were ringing him, asking him. But a lot of things, the schoolboys at Flamborough Head, recall going up to see landing tracers early September 1970 of a UFO that landed on the top of the cliffs. And I know this because the former butcher at Flamborough, who was a schoolboy back then, Dean Bolton, they call him, he was one of them boys that went up. And not men in black, men in suits came to the farmer and asked him to, remember this is September, the fields are ploughed out, everything's sorted, asked him to plough out the traces where this object had landed and marked the earth. So for something that is of no importance, it really were a little bit of, I don't know, it were a little bit sensitive. You know, yeah. There were bits that we added to Tony's, but I mean, I don't know how much he told you about it, but he didn't even want to work on it publicly because he said he'd had death threats.
Really?
Yeah, that's what he told me, and I've got the emails still.
Gosh.
Yeah, but anyway, regardless.
I've got a couple more UFO cases to mention before we get on to the animal stuff, if you think that's okay.
All good, yeah, as detailed as you like.
Right, well, this UFO event took place in Australia, a place called Maslin Beach, which is near Adelaide, on a cliff top called Oka Point. Now, my thanks to Robert Hulse for getting this information over. He went over there to give a talk in Adelaide about his experiences with alien contact over the years and that sort of stuff. And we'd met previously a friend, an Australian chap who was a civilian pilot and very good hang glider, who got interested in the crop circle. So we met him in the Wiltshire field looking at a particular crop circle. And he became particularly friendly with Robert. Well, obviously, he came back several years and had meals in my caravan I had at the time, touring caravan. So his name was Gary Ninnis. And because he lived quite close to the principal witness of this event at Maslin Beach. And he told Robert all about it. So when Robert was over there a few years ago now, I don't think I put the date down. Anyway, 2004, I think. Well, maybe 2005. Anyway, it's by the way. So he was taken by Gary to go and meet the witness, whose name's Eric Thomason, who was then at the time 69 years of age, who was a RAF pilot who joined the Royal Australian Air Force in World War II in 1940 and managed to survive all sorts of mishaps, and then with the DFM and the DSO. He was a lay teacher. He never owned a camera. He borrowed his son's 35mm film camera. He went out to walk the dog, 6 o'clock in the morning, and there was a photographic competition in the local paper to get a good sunrise shot, you see. And he'd been twice before, and the weather clamped in. So this day it was a bit better. So he had this 35mm film camera around his wrist. He never had a computer. This is important because these pictures are so good. People, including people in ufology, have tried to make out it was a model hung up by strings, and balanced. But there you go. Anyway, he's up the cliff top. It's a little bit windy. He's looking out to sea. There's nothing around, no other boats or anything. And he noticed a disturbance in the water. And he saw this object arise. And at first he thought it was like a submarine conning tower. So it's about 200 yards off the edge of the cliff, out into the sea. And it got higher and higher, and then stationary, revolving slightly. Built like a bit of we used to say in the Air Force, a brick shithouse.
Yeah.
Not at all aerodynamic, not a classic UFO disc. It wasn't triangular shaped, it was round, with chunky metal structures and like grills on it round. So I don't think there were windows, actually, like grills. Anyway, he noticed after a while, way in the background to his right, a smaller object got nearer and nearer to the main object, which he noticed underneath the main object was like a circular aperture. So he was looking at it at a slight angle, so he could see on the crescent of the curve of this hole in the bottom of the UFO a series of little lights. So he thought that was interesting. Anyway, this object came round in a circle round the back of this main object, went underneath, and then raised up underneath, and it perfectly filled the hole, so it docked with a mothercraft sort of thing.
Right.
And Hawkeye, Robert Hulse, after we got a set of pictures back from Australia, him and I both tweaked them on computer programs to sharpen things up and what have you. But Robert found there were light traces around all this was happening, and 3 going to the small object as it closed up on the main one, with 3 light things spaced apart beaming down. So Robert concluded this was like tracker beams to assist the docking and the maneuver of the items. So when this had happened, eventually the main craft flew over the cliff path where Eric and his dog were, and he'd moved slightly a little bit lower to get a bit more obscure because he realised he was being silhouetted by the sunlight on the north side. Anyway, it came over and the dog and him got drops of water dropped on him as it flew off. So just look at my notes here. Oh yes, and to show how Eric was so ambivalent about UFOs, I mean, if you or I took these pictures, we'd be dashing into the dark room or chemist to get them processed ASAP. But he kept them in the camera for weeks until he used up all the 24 or 36 shots. Can you imagine it?
What are you, Yorkshireman?
No, he could have been.
Yeah.
So eventually he got them processed. And he had 4 or 5 really good pictures. And I've got permission to put those in my book.
Ah, fabulous.
And Eric, unfortunately, now has died. But Robert went to visit his home and he's met his wife, and he's got pictures of them together. And Robert's got a picture of himself at Oka Point where Eric was when he saw the sighting. You know, it's very good. And I've got Eric filled in 2 very detailed and accurate UFO reports with drawings and dimensions and goodness knows what. And then he had trouble. He had a son-in-law at the time who was involved in the military. So trusting him, he lent him the original set of prints. And they came back with the negatives. He took the negatives as well, damaged and scratched. And he tried to claim it was done in the processing. But really, they were trying to cover it up.
Yeah.
And Eric, over the years, has suffered so much aggro from the media, UFO believers and non-UFO believers, coming to his home, badgering him, calling him a hoaxer and all the rest of it, which must have really distressed him.
I should imagine so, yeah.
And it's the same. Sometimes pictures are so bloody good, people say they must be faked. They're too good to be real, and this is a problem, isn't it?
It is, yeah, and it's you can't do right for doing wrong, because like you said, if the too good, people are going to shout fake. If they're not good, they're too blurry or they're too indistinct. It's difficult. Do you know, David? Just before we move on, I just want to stay with XS894 for a moment, because just for a moment, when I've sort of reeled off a few incidents that happened within a very close time frame to the lightning crashing, and there's another one that I didn't touch on, and I know this guy watches. I only found out due to social media the other day, but I know he watches these live streams, and if he's in chat, just give me a thumbs up to vouch for this. But he were a little boy looking towards Bempton with his mum back in the day. I think it was he gave me the date, and it made the papers, because I think his mum at the time actually reported it to paper. And he's in his back garden. He goes in and gets his mum. I think I've got it right. Correct me if I'm wrong, because he's seen 6 pewter-coloured discs, flying saucers, for want of a better word. And it was the circle. When you talked about the circle and the object going up into the circle, it was that triggered that memory. Flying over the top of them towards Bempton in the daytime. Mum went inside, got binoculars, and they viewed these things through high-powered binoculars, gave them to, I'll just say his first name, Graham, because he might not want me to say his second name, and he's viewing them. And he said there was a circle in the middle of each of these saucers that looked like molten metal. It looked like the inside of a volcano. And, you know, you were only the circle when you mentioned the circle and that UFO then. And I just thought, yeah, I didn't mention that one. And even because I like to pack as much meat around the bone of a sighting as I can. Yeah, because, well, it doesn't give us the proof, David, because you know of all the years that you've looked into things and you know that there's something very untoward happening, but we're still left with very little as regards, we know what's doing it, but we can't prove it. So we've just got to pack that meat around the bone, and that will. I
like to pack meat around the bone of the animal carcasses.
Yes, well, right there you go.
All the circumstances.
Well, have we done with UFOs temporarily now?
One more.
Yeah, all good. Yeah, fire away. I'm all ears.
1996.
And just before you go on,
yeah,
sure. I think we already know this. Anybody that's got questions for David, let's have them in block capitals, please. Fire them at Alison and Sky. Les will get them and we'll relay them. You're okay to answer some questions, David, in about 10, 15 minutes, are you?
Yeah, sure, yeah.
Oh, lovely. That'd be great. Thank you.
Well, this was a big UFO event at Jodrell Bank Radio Telescope in Cheshire, which is near Holmes Chapel. And to my knowledge, they've had at least 4 occasions now. One was 1966, shortly after it was commissioned, and a local newspaper man in the village who ran out of free paper, when I knocked on his door for witnesses, he told me about it. So anyway, this main event, it was September 1996. So it was August the 18th. Look at my notes. Anyway, on the back road behind off the main A535 road, there's a road you go off if you're going to visit Jodrell Bank, and then that back road comes round almost into, well, pretty well into Goosetree Village. It's called Bomish Lane. And on this evening, it was a Sunday, 10 o'clock, Marie Brickhill, who lived in Goosetree, who incidentally was a senior manager in the British Red Cross headquarters in Knutsford, just to give you an idea of the sort of woman. And she had in her car her parents who lived in the flat in Macclesfield. So they'd been for a meal and she was taking them home. So as they went along Bomish Lane, they're passing the telescope, and her father was the first to see this, and he was in the Royal Observer Corps during the war. I think he was pushing 80 at the time, but he was all there with his knobs on, as they say. And he said, "What the hell is that?" And there was an object, they weren't sure whether it was cylindrical or circular, hovering some 300 feet over the main Lovell dish, which is about 250 feet in diameter. And what really got him going was it was beaming down into the dish, a very wide, perhaps 80 foot wide, very soft beam of light. It wasn't dazzling, but what he was concerned about or intrigued was, in that 80 foot of projection, there was no divergence of the beam whatsoever. So that's defying certain laws.
Yeah.
I mean, even a laser beam over a long distance will diverge slightly. Anyway, it's a little narrow lane, and it was getting darkish. It was 10 o'clock in the evening, and Marie decided not to stop. And she carried on to Macclesfield to drop them and get them settled in the flat. And then she drove back. Well, this took about 50 minutes. When she came back, it was now about 11 o'clock. She was a bit worried and horrified to find this object was still there. So it was there for over an hour to our knowledge and her knowledge. She mentioned it to her husband when she got in. It was Sunday evening. He'd had a couple of glasses of wine, had his slippers on. He didn't disbelieve her, but he was declined to get in the car and go out with her, as she wanted for him to show her it was. So I heard about this from her son sometime later, about 4 weeks later, at a Quest International do at Cayton Cinema in a place called Gatley. And I was manning a Quest stand for Graham Birdsall. And the lad, who was about 16 at the time, came up to me and told me the story all about it. So that's how I got to know about it. Now then, I looked. I must have knocked on about a dozen houses and farm doors around the main telescope, trying to work out whether they were from their windows that have view of the dish. And I couldn't find one at the time who had actually seen it. And then years later, through circumstances I won't bore you with, there was a farmer who was on Bombish Lane at the Goosery end. Happened to convey, I was doing some chauffeur service with the company, his wife back home, and I mentioned it. And she said he'd seen it. So I arranged a date to go and interview him. And he declined in the end. He got chickened out. Lots of witnesses do that. They get cold feet. So that was a shame. So anyway, at least I know he'd seen it. So there's another witness from the ground who'd seen it. So from Bombish Lane.
It's very difficult to the witnesses, David, isn't it? You know, I've found that myself. You get told something absolutely incredible and you go all geared up to get the information.
Yeah.
Assuring people that you're not going to divulge their names if that's what they require, but then it just goes silent. You can't blame the people. I mean, some of these things are traumatic and frightening, and you know, but it's frustrating when you've been approached and then nothing comes of it. You talked about light divergence, and I take it you're on about the light didn't radiate anywhere else.
No, straight parallel beam. You know, straight down from the 80 feet or so into the dish, occupying probably a third of the diameter of the dish for over an hour. So.
Yeah, the lights that we're observing over the sea, and very sparsely, I might add, we don't go up there and see them every night. We might not see them for 6 months, but that's one thing we've noted, David, that when they present and they're intense and bright, they're not illuminating anything else.
No,
it's a strange one, you know, especially when you've got Coast Guard and lifeboat saying we think it's flares.
Looking for distress.
Yeah, but you know the flare, the idea of the flare is to illuminate the area,
and it burns out after a while.
And it burns out. Yeah, these things don't; they just switch off usually. But no, interesting. And have we done with UFOs?
Well, I just want to mention about Jodrell Bank's staff.
Yep,
I took the plunge and knocked on the door, and I went into the public area of it, and they have a shop and whatever. And the girl on the desk pointed me to a chap who stood a few feet away, who turned out to be an ex-Dan Air pilot, who was a member of the Macclesfield Astronomical Society, and at the time they had what they call them, where you get a star show.
Okay.
I can't think of the name. It's just gone.
No, and I can't. But not to worry.
Yeah, anyway, that was one of his jobs. He operated that thing. So I told him, and he was very interested. So he went to the door, punched the buttons to get in, and I'd asked him to ask them inside, could I see their occurrence log for the night of the 18th of August? Because I assumed after the thing was doing it now, it could have affected what they were doing. And I found out from Dr. Ian Morrison with one R, who was on holiday that Sunday, but he was back at work on the Monday morning. Anyway, they refused to let me see the log, denied seeing anything and the rest of it. So she was very rude and told me to F off in so many words. So that told me something, that they're hiding something. Anyway, I found out much years later that they do track UFOs at Jodrell Bank. I mean, they used to track the rocket for the Sputnik in 1957, was it? 60, 57. So they have that capability. And also the Americans were using their facilities to track incoming possible intercontinental ballistic missiles, because the RAF at, in Yorkshire was not complete and up and running.
Right, Farlingdales.
Farlingdales, thank you. So, and then Ian Morrison, I'd spoken to him. I went to a lecture he gave in Poynton about God, man's place in the universe. And then he'd gone public about this event, or he was doing publicity things just before they got a big, hefty, lucrative contract to look for UFOs, you know, get the message back.
Yeah.
I think Stanton Friedman called SETI a silly effort to investigate. Now he went on an interview to, I think, the Manchester Evening News. It's Dr. Morrison, to say star areas they're looking at to beam out a message would take 150 years to reach that star, and if the aliens answered, it would take another 150 years to get a message back. So we're talking about, Z said, it's not a quick process, 300 years to exchange messages. So in a way, he was rubbishing the idea of SETI.
Yeah.
He changed his tune later because they wanted the money to maintain the telescope, which was 40 years old then and falling to bits. So there you go, you know, there's this cover-up.
No, the massive cover-up, David.
Yeah.
Okay. Before we go to questions to Les, and I hope Les is about, you mentioned you're writing a book. Do you want to just touch on that?
It's very slow at the moment because of my wife's situation and being in care for months. I'm finding I'm not getting so much time to get my mind into gear and get on the keyboard. And sometimes by evening I'm too tired. I'm 86 in March, just gone. So with all the household domestic duties, I do get a bit fatigued, which is very frustrating. Frustrating for Lee Nicholson and his fiancée, who have been helping me with the pictures and so on. Yeah, well,
just a word for Lee Nicholson. We've had him on live stream, you know, and I personally, not just saying it to be nice to Lee, but I think he's probably the most underrated researcher in this country. He's absolutely top of his game. He really looks into things in great detail.
He does.
I hope we can get him back on.
Yeah, he's very good with the words and the writing up things.
Yeah. So before we go move on to animal fatalities, and I can't see Les, so I hope he's still around. Yes, he is. That's good. Do we have any questions, Les? Les, you're silent, my friend. Let's have a bit of audio.
Yes, we certainly do, Paul. And we've got to thank everybody for coming on to tonight's stream. I've got to say one thing is that when we've noticed in the YouTube stats that says some people comment, a lot of people comment actually on the videos, but probably only about half of them are actually subscribed to the channel. So if you're watching this and you're not subscribed, please help the channel along and subscribe, like, and everything great. You can do on YouTube. It will help us immensely.
Right. So, my father was a Yorkshireman. I'm delving in my pocket to see if there's any small change for you.
Oh, no,
that's okay.
Well, we need to stress that one, David. It's free to subscribe. There's no money left. So if you see it and you think you've got to pay anybody, you don't. Just press the button.
So with that out of the way, Paul, we will. I've got some questions here which Alison has sent through. Newsy Brown, welcome to the show, Newsy, if you're still there. Were the results released of that case that Richard D. Hall looked at? I think it was the Sussex case. Now, I don't know what particularly she's talking about there, David, but probably you know.
Yes, it's a horse we went to see.
Is it the horse one? Yeah.
A place called Alfriston in East Sussex it is. Not very miles from Brighton, England. Yeah.
Was there any follow-up to that, David, do you know? To any
follow-up? Well...
Was she waiting for an autopsy or something, if I remember?
Yeah, the owner of the horse was on site. The chap that runs the establishment where they have horses there and sports things. He came down to see us while we were there.
Yeah.
So he wrote a quick note to give us, Richard and myself and his lady friend at the time, to attend a post-mortem the following Monday, I think, at the Royal Veterinary College, north side of London. Anyway, unfortunately, en route back, we were going to have to stop a night somewhere, and Richard's lady friend had quite a senior manager job in I think it was an estate agent or travel agency, one or the other, so we couldn't stop over. Anyway, I was on the phone in the car heading round to London, and got in contact with somebody at the Royal Veterinary College, and they said because of the hour of the day, they can't do it tonight, that night. It would be the following day, Monday. Anyway, we were definitely not wanted to be. They don't want us to be there in any case. So presumably the thing took place on the Monday, and the Royal Veterinary College, which Tony Dodd had contacted them in the past, asking about the modus operandi with the animals, and they denied any knowledge of that sort of thing happening, just as an aside. Refused the animal owner a copy of the horse's, post-mortem. And another case of another horse in Leicestershire in 1990, whatever, quite recently anyway, 2015 or maybe 2016, where again we were blocked getting a copy of the post-mortem report, and blocked by an RSPCA inspector. Tony Dodd had hinted to me more than once that all organisations, whether it be veterinary, RSPCA, the police, the DEFRA now, and the MAF as it was, have people in place who are in the loop with what's going on and must pull out the stops to block information coming out. So this police RSPCA inspector, Andy Bostock is his name, I don't mind giving it him, and the surgeon, the pathologist, was a Swiss lady called Andrew Lebont. Doesn't matter. I spoke to her more than once from Richard's home, so there was a bit of time interval in between, trying to press her to release the report. And she said, I can't do it without the say-so from Andy Bostock. So here we've got a fairly low rank in the RSPCA structure as an inspector blocking it. So who's pulling his strings, I asked myself, to stop this happening? So the horse owners, who were both ladies, a lady in the latter case in Leicestershire, was absolutely brassed off. We went to see her, and Richard interviewed her on camera and what have you. And there was a second horse when we got there, was waiting to go for a PM. It was a male horse on that occasion. Well, Honey was a female. So once it disappeared to a place called, partly a veterinary college. It's a college called Sutton Bonington, which is, I think, it just into Nottinghamshire, where it took place. So we just drew a blank. We gave up in the end. So as your lady Lucy who's asked the question, you're very lucky if you can proceed and get hard written evidence from professionals like veterinary surgeons and pathologists to say this is what's happened and this is peculiar. So I was lucky to have Professor Fremont, who was a pathologist and criminology pathology from Manchester, who agreed to assist me. And I've got a bit of a story about how that happened, if you want me to encounter that.
Yeah, just before you go on, and I know Liz has got some more questions, but if I don't say this, it'll just slip out of my mind.
Yeah.
We're talking about people placed in various organisations to kind of suppress the knowledge getting out and to the information. And speaking from my experience with an high-ranking Coast Guard who's told me that you will never, ever, and this guy's really high up in Coast Guard, never ever find anything relating to the unexplained, the paranormal, said in any of their literature or reports that they put out. And he said, inadvertently, we're trained in what to say so that none of that information ever goes out. So in a little bit of a way, that's a similar thing, isn't it? You know?
Yeah, we're really up against it because we've got all these people with clout, with a high level behind them, and they feel very secure and quite cocky about it. In fact, I'm one just diverting a case in sorry, what county it was. It might have been Leicestershire again.
Okay.
And it was two horses. There was three in the field. One survived but was traumatized, and one got the usual injuries. I'm avoiding the M word. And he reported it to the police, as us farmers do. It was a big loss. Even a horse is expensive, you know. So. And before very long, this brown vehicle appeared with a trailer and a van, and started without a by your leave to hitch up the animal to haul it onto this trailer and cart it off. And this nasty woman, and it might be the same person that had a go at me, I don't know, said to the farmer, you mustn't talk to anybody, especially the media. And if you do, you'll find farming very difficult. Sorry, my phone's ringing. I'm hoping my wife will take it. It's not you, is it?
No, I'm not ringing. No.
So I'll shut it off.
It's okay. Okay, that's fine.
So what he was threatening her with, we will have a look at your farming subsidies, review your farming subsidies. And a lot of farmers in those days, certainly in 1999-ish, were totally reliant to keep in business and keep the roof over their heads on government subsidies. So they had a big weapon to shut him up. Anyway, he had a brother. No, it was a different case, sorry. Senior police officer, anyway, got involved, and he got told to shut up in London headquarters about some sheep. And these two people appeared to remove the animals from his field. And the farmer was out at the time, and his stockman, this car arrived, posh car, two gentlemen got out, said, we've come for the sheep. Well, he assumed his boss had organised it and helped them load in the sheep into the car. So when the boss came back, he looked in the barn to see where they put the animals. He said, what have we done with them? So he explained what happened, and he was absolutely furious. So he had a brother, I think it was a brother, who was a chief inspector in London, to follow it up and exercise some muscle, he thought, onto the MAF or DEFRA, whoever. It might have been still MAF then. Anyway, in the end, he got nowhere and was told to drop the case. So that's just another instance where, you know, even a senior police officer who was not in the loop to shut things up, but wanted to get. Because he said a theft has been taking place, this was his argument, while they're stealing two of the sheep, albeit the dead ones. They're still worth something for the fleece. Yeah. So he was doing his job and his duty to report a theft. And he got told to back off and drop the case.
Well, I'll jump back to that in shortly, but let's get some more questions if that's okay, David.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because I've got a similar story to tell you about.
Okay.
Yeah, Tino, excuse me, voice went there. Tino is asking, hello, David, can you tell us anything about the deceased calf that was found in Todmorden 2 years ago? Do you know anything about that?
He does.
No, it was left to rot, basically. So Lee Nicholson got to it and written a very good report about it, which I'm going to put in my book. Thank you, Lee. And it was horrified to find been some predation on it. It was being pulled about, and it was rotting considerably. So the carcass, the farmer, and I'm pretty sure which farm was the owner of it, because I'd had some sheep cases with him before, and he was a bit of a funny character. this farmer. So he didn't attempt to reclaim the body, the carcass. It was left to lie there and rot. So anyway, fortunately, the man that found it, a place called a fellow called Albert Tyus, took some excellent pictures of it. Close-ups of the face stripping and all the usual stuff, which we've got on file. So we're very grateful to Albert, who had enough now to perhaps a bit of an understanding about the animal problem to recognise it for what it was. So that's why another reason why the more people, I'm hoping the book will do this when they get it out, which might be some months or even a year, will enlighten people, if hopefully they buy it, to understand, because it's going to be loaded with pictures, this book, which it might be a bit of a costly enterprise for me. But you cannot discuss and describe these injuries easily. You need to see the pictures and let people know what the MO is, a regular repeated MO on all the animal species that exist. And I've got a list I can mention later on of wild animals and everything that have been affected, not just
the Todmorden calf.
Yeah,
that is a repeat area, then, David. Yeah.
Yes. So yes, good prompt. A repeat area. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not rushing you past these because we could touch on it again, but we'll get the flack if we don't get as many questions in as we can. So go on, Les. Hit us with another one if you've got one.
Yes, I've got a question from Fred Flintstone. Why do the perpetrators of the cattle fatalities leave the carcasses to be found? Why do you think that happens there, David?
Yeah, $64,000 question.
Yeah.
Well, I think basically they're bothered. And I think possibly they might be sending us a sort of message to say, we're here, look at what we can do. So it might be a sort of boast, perhaps. But all this is conjecture.
Yeah.
We don't know why they leave them. Sometimes they drop them from some height onto the ground. That is a case in a cow in the States that Linda Moulton Howe reported, and shows an indent. When they rolled the animal over, there was a big indentation on the ground. So it had fallen from some height to do that.
Yeah.
Another case, there was a cow had dropped through trees, breaking branches off as it fell to the ground. So I think they just chuck them out of the spaceship because they no longer need them. They're just taking up space, and perhaps they don't like the smell.
It could be as simple, David, as they don't even realise that they just can't do it. Do you know what I mean? It's no consequence whether we ponder why, the ifs, buts, or anything. They can just do it, and it might just be as simple as that. I don't know. We found sheep in 2017-18, and I'll stop because I want to get to questions, but we thought they'd been dropped from air, and the way, Les found one with me. We went to one day, but we'll get to that later. Come on, Les, hit us with another question, please.
Yeah, and thanks for the question, Fred Flintstone. And I'm sure it was you I bought my last car from, Fred Flintstone. Yeah, I'm sure I got my car from you. Yeah.
Brought your last what?
Car.
Oh, car. Oh,
from Fred Flintstone. I was just put that question forward, David. Yeah.
Did it have square wheels?
Yeah.
That's right. You've got it in one. Yeah. So, Anthony Hudson, David. Right. Are there any updates as to the human M of the young couple at Dolby Forest?
Well, there's more than two there at Dolby.
Yeah,
I think I'm thinking of Richard Hall's report in the Brecon Beacons, which was a young couple. That's right, yeah. In the late teens, 18, 20-ish they were. I think the girl was 16. So they were disposed of in whatever way they do. Same as Tony Dodd reckoned all those corpses in Dolby Forest would go to Porton Down in Wiltshire and shipped to America. When I said to Tony, what what do they think? How do they write a death certificate? What does the coroner do? What do they do about burial arrangements? And what does the pathologist make of it and all that? And Tony, I was a bit horrified. His belief was they never tell the relatives, even if they knew who they were, they are just classed as missing persons, never to be found, and that's the way they like to keep it. So they just get rid of the bodies, really.
Kind of makes sense. And just as a side note, for the people that think Wolflands is entirely about the cryptid phenomena, obviously we've touched on UFOs and light form phenomena, but we have also touched on this. But obviously when you watch it, you'll see why and how.
Can I get one more question in, Paul?
Please, Les. Yeah, please.
Yeah, Adam Sander is asking, does David have any views on the cat M's or the Croydon cat killer?
Well, Richard Hall's done more work on that than me, right. And he some of the cats possibly have been done by humans, but there's so many of them, and not just around Croydon, they're all over the country, all over the world, in fact.
It's spread out, hasn't it? It's
not cases in New Zealand as well, missing cats as well, never to be seen again, and in large numbers, not just a few. So I think the media, in a way, they messed it up. And there's two individuals that Richard interviewed and exchanged emails with who claimed to be in the know on it all, had a mixed agenda, and it didn't go anywhere. So it just died a death in the end about the Croydon cat mutilator. But certainly I've got pictures, and Linda Moulton Howe has given me a couple of cats where they've been dissected and a section of the body has been taken out in the middle. So they've got the front end and the back end, and there's a slice missing of some width. That's just one.
It's a fascinating one, and I did some work on this with Steph Young, and there'll be people in the audience familiar with the writings of Steph Young. And if you're not, I suggest you look and find the books, because they are good. And I'm not just plugging her work because I've not spoke to her in years, but we did some work on the Croydon cat killer, and it were amazing. Like you said, some of these things could have been done at the hands of people, but in a lot of instances, these cats, and let's face it, there were multiple cats killed in close proximity and in the areas in one night. And have you ever tried to get close to a cat that's not in its home environment? And they were dropped on the doorsteps of the people that owned them. And this went on for years. And it weren't just cats. It were fox, it were deer, it were all sorts of animals. As you know, David, and I'm not telling you anything you don't know. So highly unusual. And we're not talking about 8 or 9 cats. We're talking about hundreds and hundreds. And nobody ever really got close to who or what was doing it. They're fascinating. It's one I'd like to revisit, to be honest with you. That and it's not Croydon anymore, is it? It's really expanded.
No. There's also a few dogs as well, being found in peculiar situations and stripped entirely of skin on the outside, down to the feet, which left like little socks on. 360-degree precise cuts around the feet.
Well, as we did say, I don't know whether Les has got another question. I can see him poised there. What's he saying? Go on.
Okay.
If you finish at that point, David, can I just come in? Are you ready for a compliment, David, from one of our viewers?
Okay.
Right. So, big compliments, right? So this is not a question. Chris M is saying, I just wanted to say it's lovely to see David. I've been a huge fan of his work for many years, and it's great to see him looking well. Thank you for everything you've done to promote and expose the subject.
Oh, thank you very much.
Oh, that's lovely.
Yes, thank you very much, sir. Oh, that gives me a cue. I was presented this.
Are you giving him his tenner now, David? Are you going to give him?
I was given this by Gary Heseltine at his 2015 UFO conference in Homeforth, and it was to in recognition of 20 years contribution to ufology. It also includes the animal stuff, but Gary Heseltine's not very happy about the animal stuff, by the way. So he wanted to play that down.
Yeah, no, not to worry. I'm sure he'll get over it.
The word is getting a bit faded now, like me.
Well, not to worry. I went to that conference, actually. Is it the one where you had to rush away with Richard D. Hall because there'd been...
that was the Leicestershire Horse we went to, yes.
Yeah, I remember. Yeah, I went to the conference.
Yeah.
So, just... My screen's gone black again. Oh, it's back up again. I don't know what's happening there, people. Just before we move on to more cases, David, I don't know whether you've ever come across anything like this, but at the peak of when things were happening around this area, it's gone black again, screen. That's
I can see you. I can still see you.
I'm assuming you guys can see me, but I don't know what's happening here.
Can Les
Come on,
see?
it says no signal, entering power save mode. Don't do this to me. Right, we're back again. We're in the room. I found some badgers that had been stripped of fur around the waist, so it looked like they've got trousers on.
Oh.
So I know I'm not trying to dress it up and make it sound nice, people. It's a horrific thing that's happened to these animals, but the heads were missing and everything, totally stripped of fur apart from around the midsection. And I found 2 badgers at the height of when we were losing the sheep. And I don't know what it was, just you that said the animals look like they've got little socks on. Some had been stripped, and that's what prompted me. But jumping to it, David, what led you to at the start investigate these animal fatalities?
Well, I think it was influence of Tony Dodd and Linda Moulton Howe, and I looked at their work. And I thought, this is the way to go, because there's residual evidence left in the field, which you can get hands on, photograph, take samples from, and hopefully get them into the hands of a specialist person, either a veterinary pathologist or anybody who's got professional know-how to look at the causes of death. So... that's what triggered me off those 2 people, really, with the work they've been doing.
And is there any particular cases that you want to touch on now for us?
Yes, I'll come to that. Do you want me to talk about Tony Fremont's?
Please, whatever's comfortable for you, David. We're all ears.
Well, I got hold of him, luckily, because thanks for a dubious fellow called Ray Santilli.
The autopsy.
You might have heard of the alien autopsy. Well, this film has been held. A lot of money is tied up in this, and 20 odd countries and media of all sorts. And a documentary maker on Channel 5 had held back his program to insert this alien thing in. And the morning after it got out, or the day before, I should say, the BBC in Manchester had asked Professor Fremont from the college, who's an eminent forensic pathologist, and a colleague to view the footage and come into the studio to the breakfast show at 8 o'clock in the morning and express what they thought. They also invited Graham Birdsall to come with his views, assuming the ufology fraternity would say, Eureka, this is a smoking gun, this is what we've been waiting for. Well, I knew from Graham and Tony, their work they'd done, they were pretty sure it was a hoax, without any shadow of a doubt. Anyway, Graham couldn't get to Manchester that morning for something he was doing, so he said to me, I'm only 12 miles down the road, could I sit in for him? And when I got there was this chap sat across the table who turned out to be Professor Fremont. And the two, I always told the producer what our views were beforehand, but they hadn't deliberately briefed the 2 lady presenters who really thought that I was going to say, Eureka, this is a smoking gun sort of thing.
You didn't give them
Because they came to me first. So I gave our collective Quest International views on it. And then they introduced, while there was a brief weather and news spot where microphones were silent. So Tony Fremont passed a note across to say who he was, and I put a note back to say who I was. And after the program was over, as we were going out of the building, I said to him what I was tempted to do, and was he prepared to help? And he said yes, he would. He would be interested. So that's how I got involved with him. So thank you to a lady in autopsy scam, I got Tony Fremont on board. But unfortunately, in the end, he got warned off, partly from a professor of veterinary pathology at Liverpool University, who I went to be interviewed, and I took Robert Holtz with me, who had seen my Farmers Weekly advert, and I'll mention the advert. I've got a picture of it here, so people can see the page. Can't believe this.
It's always the case, David. When you're looking for it, it won't turn up.
Yeah. Anyway, basically, what's happened to it? I had an idea. I thought, who's of all the media? It doesn't matter who's most likely to know about this and to get information out. And I thought the Farming Press. So I went to the Farmers Weekly first, which was partly the wish of Timothy Good. Because Timothy Good, I was at a conference in Manchester where he launched one of his books, and it all finished, and the Birdstalls were packing up, and he was waiting for his transport back to a hotel, I think. And during the proceedings, I happened to mention, a chap had stood up and asked a question at a Q&A session and said to Graham, why aren't we hearing more about the animal deaths? So he pointed to me to stand up and answer the question. So I said then I was thinking of advertising in the Farming Press to get more information. So at the end, Timothy Good said that was good. He's prepared to fund an advert, which was only in for it's a weekly publication. It was in the classified section. It only takes 2 columns up, but it was £300 plus the VAT.
Yeah.
So Timothy said, as long as you get me a VAT invoice, that's fine. So that was very nice of him. And so basically, and Fremont said that was probably a very good way forward. He supported that idea, but not to mention him by name. So I just said a professor of pathology in Manchester. So I listed all the MO sort of things to look out for, to inform the farmers and animal owners. So I didn't want to be flooded out with predation cases and all this sort of thing. So it acted as a filter, and it worked. So when it went out, I had about 30 phone calls from all around the UK, from the Hebrides down to Cornwall.
Some were talking about suffering loss.
Yes, some had only just happened, and I went and retrieved some carcasses as a result of that. Others happened a few weeks ago or months ago. And the lady in where was it? Trying to think now. Don't know.
It's okay.
Anyway, it's in the Hebrides. It was a deer, but she lost, when I came back to her for information, the photograph, she got cold feet. Right. But the one in Cornwall was in Lou, LWE, and the farmer said he'd had a sheep stripped, it was a lamb, sorry, youngish lamb, of all outer flesh and fleece. So it was just a skeleton, but all the internal organs were still intact. So somehow it had been skinned. So that was one.
And it kind of tells you something, David, because natural predation, and they would, I know it sounds macabre, people listening to this, but they would go for the liver and the kidneys.
Yeah,
you know. Yeah. And that they're being left, and the actual. I'm going to let you roll with this. Sorry, I'm rolling. Yeah, go on.
Yeah. So that's really kicked me off. And then advertised in the Farmer's Guardian 3 times on later dates, one of which was paid for because the Farmer's Guardian is more animal orientated than the Farmer's Weekly. Going back to the Farmer's Weekly a minute, a journalist that worked on the Farmer's Weekly, they obviously saw this advert in their own classified ads section and were intrigued and thought, oh, we've got a story here. So this lad, I sent him images and background, and he wrote a 200-word piece. But his features editor, a fellow called David Cousins, blocked it and sent me a very polite letter back saying, this is perhaps too disturbing for our readers, blah, blah. Wish me luck in my endeavours, blah, blah.
But we don't want to know the truth.
So the lad did the story, was very annoyed about that because he put that effort into it. So that's another example. Anyway, the Farmer's Guardian, Graham Bursell paid for one of the adverts. Jeff, a fellow who was in the APFU called Christopher Shewan, who joined us after Graham Bursell's 2001 conference in Leeds, when I was on my feet giving my first talk about the animal stuff. And Graham was saying, David needs people to help. You know, how can you help? He put a plea out. There was something like 800 people there in the old building before they knocked it about. And this chap came forward, and I thought, oh, this is good. He seemed very well educated and so on. So he, of his own money, he said his own money, but I've now later got doubts about that, offered to pay one of the adverts, so for another one. And then Richard Hall paid for one as well. So that's at least
there's
three.
no shortage of assistance and people.
No, I'm very
David,
great.
have you ever been warned off yourself?
Yes, once. And that was a result of the Admiral advert in the Farmers Weekly. And I had a nasty phone call on my mobile phone one morning about 11 o'clock from a lady who said she was from the MAF. She didn't say where it was, but she'd seen the advert, and she demanded to know the name of the professor of pathology, which I declined, because at that time we were not naming him. And then she said things like, you've no right to be doing unofficial experiments on animals. I said, these aren't experiments, they're straightforward post-mortems and photography of them, and to see what had happened. And she said, and I said, why? She said, because of BSE. And I said, sorry, you're telling me we've got BSE with sheep now? And she went quiet for a moment.
So you basically faced.
She demanded my address. I gave her my address. I expected to get a stinking letter to arrive to follow up her conversation with me. So she was very anti, and was obviously aiming to put me off.
Yeah, but it didn't work, did it?
No, no,
it didn't work. So what? I mean, I don't want to jump your train of thought here, but what about the Dartmoor fatalities? Do you want to get into any cases and whether UFO or light form phenomena reported around any of the kills that you were looking at?
There was a horse in Dartmoor I looked at. I got pictures of in more recent years. I think I've written this down actually.
Okay.
There we go. But really, the man to talk about all that is Mike Freebury.
Mike Freebury, okay.
But unfortunately, he's got a dreadful disease, which is a progressive thing. But he spent a lot of time down in Dartmoor with David Gillam, who was the leader of the Cornwall UFO group, setting up rapport from farmers, particularly a lady called Mary Alford, who was a bit of a well-known person in the fraternity there. So he started off being triggered by the pony mutilations of 1977, from which I think there was 16 or 17 horses then. So he did sterling work, and he battled with the Information Commissioner. He filed a Freedom of Information request, and he fought for 2 years. He struggled to get the Information Commissioner, who's based near me in Wilmslow, to get the Devon and Cornwall police to release a few injuries of sheep. And a typical jaw strip on the left side, nothing extraordinary. And in the end, they were forced by the Information Commission, he wanted to release the pictures to Mike. So really, you need to read his book.
We need to do. David, okay, go on, show us.
Killers on the Moor. Killers on the Moor.
On the Moor.
Yeah.
Did you do any work with? Correct me if I'm wrong here. Anne Andrews. No.
Yes.
Oh right. Okay.
Well, a little bit.
Because it's a lady I'd like to get on live stream. You might not have great detail about it, but have you got a little bit of background that you could fill us in on? What's happening?
She wasn't involved in the animal stuff, as far as I thought. No.
Right. Okay. I thought they'd found small mammals and things on the farm.
They might well have. They might well have.
Yeah. Right.
Okay. I stayed there with them for a day on the way down to a funeral of a good colleague to the crop circles down in Norwich. And we stopped at their house overnight to split the journey. And yes, they were a very lovely family.
So is there any cases that you want to move on to then and tell us about?
Right.
We've got about 30 minutes left, David. So
okay,
we're sort of coasting through this.
Okay. Where to start? There's that much stuff. I had quite a job sorting what to talk about and what not to talk about. I mentioned Bostock information. Yeah. Right. Well, there's a ram and sheep in a farm in West Wales, a place called Plymp, Plymp, in April 2002. And the farmer had taken excellent pictures of particularly of the ram. And he'd had sheep mutilations as well, but the ram was the most interesting one. And it had a typical classic pear-shaped hole in its belly, exposing some of the rib area, and all its genitals have been removed cleanly. It was just clean where they would have been. It's incredible. And a massive jaw strip, tongue out. The skull was just like a skeleton skull. This is where you need photographs to try and explain what I've done.
It is, and it's graphic. And did any of the farmers in any of these cases, and I know I'm cutting you short with Ram here, but did they ever report seeing anything else, or seeing anything that they could think were responsible for it throughout the whole time that you've investigated this?
Not that I can think of offhand, to be honest.
No.
I'd have to think about that one. This pear-shaped hole I found on the land near a farm near Bedgellet in northwest Wales in 2001, and its back end, its side of it, had this beautiful symmetrical pear-shaped hole, and there was about half an inch of the fur and skin removed, just so exposing a clean, like a periphery of clean skin all around this hole, and obviously something had been taken out from inside. And when I contacted the farmer, he said he'd buried it. Anyway, I went back and I said, I'll come back with a spade and I'll dig it up. So,
well, that shows determination, David, doesn't it? Let's face it.
He wouldn't let me do that. So whether he did, in fact, bury it, lots of farmers leave the dead stock for foxes to take, natural predation to shift it, save him burying it, all the rest of it. So that might have been a cover story. So that's why he didn't want me to dig it up, because he hadn't buried it. But there you are.
How was your work being received by RSPCA and police and other official bodies?
Well, I would think they're not happy. I mean, that horse case in Alfriston, your lady asked the question earlier, when Richard and I got there, they'd put the horse off the field onto a trailer so we could take photographs and examine it. And we got there, it was a Sunday evening, and there was, we didn't get there till midnight. It was a Monday morning. There was 10 police officers, including an inspector, hovering about. We just thought, for a horse death, this is over the top. So something
on farmland.
They come to the premises where the owner had got stables and riding stables and land and whatever. And So
Seems a lot of security for
yes,
a deceased animal.
Richard and I said to them, we were happy. They were on the premises, not far away. We stood by the trailer. We said we're happy to talk to them. They never came to us. They never came to speak to us. So,
do you know, at Wilsthorpe, when at the height of when the activity were taking place, David, I went and spoke to a farmer close to where the UFOs had been seen.
yeah.
Sheep farmer. I'll try not to labour on with it because we've got 25 minutes left, but he said he came out to his sheep one morning and he's got the usual fence, fencing about 6 inch by 4 inch square fencing with a raw barbed wire over the top. He said, and the sheep are in this field. He said, and there's one on a little bit of a raised area in another field. There's all mud around it. I'm not going to go too graphic with details. He says, and I thought, how's that got over there? He says, I looked at fence. There's no wool on fence or anything. There's nothing. He said, so I got into the field. He said, it's soft mud. We all know what it's like. Well, most people know what it's like in a farmyard, and it's like slurry. He said, in this field, because they move them about, don't they, just to sort of make grazing better. He says, and I went to this animal. He says, my wellies were only footprints there, not even sheep prints. He says, and I'm looking at it, and it's alive, the unfortunate animal, and it's in a terrible state. That's the most I'll say, because people will be moaning at us for saying too much. Rang the police. DEFRA got involved, and they said it's jumped the fence. He says, look, there's no wool. He says, I showed them, the police officers before DEFRA. He said, look, only prints on the ground are mine, and sheep don't jump, not a fence that high, and there's no wool. And he already pressed for the report of the reasons that they thought this animal, it jumped the fence, and they were blunt with him, and it jumped the fence, and that's it. And he said it didn't. And, have you come across things like that throughout the research, throughout the investigations? Not exactly that case, but just that wall of denial I'm talking about.
Yes, well, wall of denial reminds me we went to see this professor of pathology, veterinary pathology at Liverpool Uni. And he banged on for nearly 2 hours. We were there from 2 o'clock till 5 o'clock, actually. I took some pictures of Tony. Linda Moulton Howe's one of her books. And he kept saying all the time, and he first of all, before this appointment was fixed, he wanted me to send him those pictures, and I declined to do that. I said, I can show you them, but in your presence. I didn't want to be sending him, through the post or that sort of thing, not knowing what he was going to do with him. So that's why he set up a meeting. And so I think he'd been briefed, because he has a good friend who is the head of the laboratories at Barton Hall, where I got that nasty phone call from that woman who sort of put me off and wanted to know who the professor of pathology was. So I reckon he'd been prompted to contact me to find out what I got, basically. Yeah. So Robert Hulse, if he's listening, I'm not sure he's logged in or not. But anyway, he sat with me in that premises, in a specimen room, actually. And he said all the time, he kept saying, oh, it's predation, predation, predation. Only when we were leaving, after 3 hours of dialogue with him and showing him so many images, he admitted that some of them didn't seem to fit the predation thing. Then his parting shot was, I've got a good friend who was in charge of the math labs in Barton Hall. I think you should speak to him. Well, I didn't tell him that I'd had this nasty phone call from a colleague of this boss man he knew.
Before so it were probably going nowhere, weren't it?
Yeah.
So, I mean, unless you've got something in front of you, David, I'd like to. First of all, I'd like to see Les and see if he's got any questions before we close this down. But I'd like to talk about the marine mammals and your work on the dolphins, the seals, and what you've discovered there.
The seals, yes.
Yeah,
I've got a note of that. I did a lot of work on that. 30-odd seals in Norfolk over a period of less than a year. I'd been to a lab in Norfolk where they did PMs and spoke to the guy who had looked at one of the corkscrew cut cases, had sent to him from the National Trust.
Yeah.
What's it, Island in Norfolk? Yes. So I'm pretty convinced these were occurring in the Vancouver area, Sable Island. We've heard nothing since, and nothing happened before.
Did you find that it were happening globally, David? Then, so if you're getting these fatalities in UK, you're getting them all around the globe at a similar time. Yeah,
I've got a list here of animals that take me abroad.
Right.
And lots of this was a chap I got involved with who was very helpful, Joe Fleury, who lives in Switzerland, and he spent a lot of time on the internet searching for stuff and sent me some of these cases with images that I didn't know about. Anyway, wild animals start off with the 3 lions decapitated and the paws cut off neatly, and that was in Tanzania in South Africa. And another lion in South Africa on the 7th of October 2016, plus another 8 lions decapitated in South Africa in 2016. A crocodile decapitated and the feet removed, like the lions, in South Africa, October 2016. Chris Ewan, who had married an Argentinian lady, he went and spent a lot of his year living in Argentina, went to a cow death. It's a place called El Chacon, which is near in Patagonia in 2004. And it had all the internals. When the vets opened up, and Chris was there when they cut it open, it was empty apart from some remains of the stomach left. So it had a rectal core, which is about, in a cow, usually 9 to 10 inches. And the tongue was missing. So how did they get all those organs out? Unless they took them out through the anus or the mouth. Mm. The local dogs, the farm dog wouldn't go near it, and so on. So that's Argentina, and there have been a spate of mutilations in Argentina and Uruguay. A goat in Switzerland with the trachea exposed, and that's the same as the Aberdeen case, where the trachea is exposed but not apparently damaged. So the chest is opened up, and the animal has also had the usual jaw strip, eyes, ears, etc. Many sheep and lambs in Northern Ireland, a place called Feeney. You need to read Circles of Deceit by Dermot Butler and Carl Nally. We covered that extensively. Seals and dolphins was a decapitation on Whitby Beach in May 2013. That a father and his son had just arrived on holiday.
It were happening here as well, David. May 2013. That's what I was getting at when I was when I asked this question.
Right.
Were we seeing this globally? Because you've just cited Whitby, and I know for a fact, I didn't know about the May 2013, but I knew that seals and harbour porpoise were being killed in a very unusual manner in 2013 around this area, and we're only looking 30-40 miles up the coast. I didn't know about them that you're talking about. So did you see a pattern, or what it just sort of focused on? Yeah,
I think so. Yeah. All around the world. When the father and the son went back at the beach after he got settled in and they went for a walk again, and the carcass had been quickly removed by whom wasn't left on the beach anymore. So it was just a little look.
Okay.
Vancouver, back to seals. Vancouver, Firth of Tay, Norfolk, 2009, 2010, and up to 2016. Now, how about this one? This is due to from Joe Fleury in Switzerland. A duck-billed platypus. I thought they were extinct, but they're not, apparently.
No, it's Australian.
In Australia, in a place called Albury, in Australia, April 2017, there was 2 decapitated. Now then, in October 2017, in South Africa National Park, was a wild elephant. huge elephant with a massive hole in its belly. The skin had been cut away. Its genitals had been removed. And the story was it's been involved in a road traffic accident. Well, I mean, if a car had hit the elephant, I mean, the car would have been a write-off, I would have thought. But the only photograph is quite a small file size, and I need to try to blow it up.
It would be good to see. Obviously, time doesn't allow, and it's great that you're touching on these, but it'd be good to see backstory on and research that's done into a lot of them. But duck-billed platypus,
yeah,
it's strange. Do you know that I think the only mammal, somebody will correct me, that lays, do they lay eggs? I think they do, and I'm feeling that they're poisonous as well. Somebody's going to correct me and tell me I'm wrong, but yeah,
I've never looked into the
bit of trivia. So shall we see for the last 15 minutes if Les has got any questions?
Yes, certainly.
I can't believe that. I've seen one in a canal near me, duck-billed platypus. All right, I don't think you have. That's not a question, sure.
Yeah, thanks for that, Paul and David. First of all, I've got to say thanks again to Lee Roscoe for the super chat of £20. And he says, every little helps people to get closer to the truth. So that's quite true. So thank you again, Lee. Great supporter of the show. So basically, we are at a point where I've got a question here. Steve-O is asking, David, is there an alien caught on camera David is convinced by? Have you ever seen an alien caught on camera that you've been convinced by the footage, David?
I've not personally seen this footage, but Linda Moulton Howe has, apparently, and she reported that the ranchers or the witnesses saw a cow down not far from the house, which is, they tend to be quite close to the property sometimes, quite often, and it was lying on its side, and they saw 2 or 3 little people, as described as little aliens, doing movements with their hands, which floated the animal up off the ground. So whether they actually got it up to a craft, I'm not sure. I'm just shutting the windows. The bloody noisy plane just coming over. Yeah. So
you've not seen anything yourself there, but
no.
Are you convinced by that video, though, David?
Well, yes, I think it's very likely. I had no reason to think it was a false story. Obviously impressed Linda Moulton Howe. She put it out on one of her commentaries or things on a website, probably.
Earth Files, I think the website, isn't it?
Earth Files, thanks for reminding me.
And just before we go to Les again, let's just throw net a little bit wider. So Les talked about aliens and anything that you've seen that you might have been convinced by, and you've not seen anything personally. But what about UFO photographs or footage?
No, I haven't got any.
No.
I've seen 2 peculiar things when I was at a caravan site in North Wales near Penmaenmawr, and I was walking back up the driveway off the road into where the site was. There was a bit of an area where you walk your dog, and there was bits of puffy cloud, and something at the corner of my caught my eye, and I looked up, and this object darted in behind one of these little clouds, and I waited and waited, and it never came out of the cloud. So, previous to that, we've been having burglaries and sheds broken into for a while, a year or 2 after we were married. So we had a dog who was very good at pairing intruders. And we were both woken up while I was awakened by this whirring sound. And I said to Vivian, are you awake? She said, yes, I can hear it. And it was very close out of the window at the back of the house. And there's a pub behind us with a big car park and what have you. But the strange thing was, neither of us could get out of bed and open the curtains and have a look to see if something was there causing the noise. And the dog didn't bark, which is unusual.
And have you questioned that loads of times over years? Why didn't I get up?
Yes.
Yeah. So, I knew you'd say that, yeah.
Something prevented us getting up.
Yeah.
To witness this object creating this sound.
And it weren't the fact that you're not saying it, David. It weren't the fact that you were paralysed and couldn't move. It was just the strangeness that normally inquisitive David or Paul or Les or anybody listening, you'd have got up and had a look, wouldn't you?
Well, previous when there had been noises of interference, I had the first thing I did was open up the curtains.
Yeah.
And we got some security lights at the back, a motion detector, so if it come look to see if the light was on, you see.
Yeah.
We didn't do it. We've often said to each other, why didn't you get out of bed? Why didn't you get out of bed?
I think we've all done that.
Can I just interject at this point? Yeah, we've got Robert Hulse, who's in the green room. I don't know if he's a friend of yours, David.
Very good friend.
He's coming to the green room. I don't know whether he needs to be on the screen or...
Well, take me off screen. Take me off screen, Les, if you like, and put Robert on. This is good.
Does Robert need to be on, David?
It might be. There's a lot of useful things to say. He's been with me in several mute cases. He's been with me.
Okay, we'll bring try and bring Robert in then and see if this works. Welcome,
Robert.
Yeah. Hi everybody. Nice to see you, Paul and Les.
Yeah, good to see you, Robert.
Yeah.
And great to make an appearance. And over to you.
Well, I've been listening to Dave talking for quite a while, and it's been like going down memory lane with Dave because I've been, with him on many of his things that he's done with the animal cases, shall we say. I don't know whether you mentioned the stroke case, Dave.
No, I made lots of notes about it. I didn't get around to that. It's down on the Severn Estuary in Gloucestershire.
This is the sheep.
Yeah,
fill us in.
Yeah, and we ended up in the vets, didn't we? The vet came with CID officers, which you kept entertained with what the whole thing was about. And I helped the lady vet. She cut the heads off 3 of them for radiography, and then she wanted to run the whole one. So I helped her in the car boot. I never realised how heavy a sheep, ewe with all the fleece on, was. So she was so grateful. She said, "You can come down with us to the veterinary practice in Chepstow, isn't it?"
Yeah.
We did. So I took photographs in there and of them working. And she said an interesting thing. Jane Glover Hill, her name was.
Yeah.
And while she was working, she said, and she'd obviously seen and was aware of the alien autopsy. She said, "Just think, we might be doing our first alien autopsy," which was very humorous.
Yeah.
She said it with a tongue in her cheek, but
nice to have somebody so open, though, David, and so helpful.
They were doing that because someone had suggested to the police there'd been guns used, and these animals had been shot, so they wanted radiographs to look for the dense metal fragments in the skulls of the sheep, which of course there weren't any. So that was an interesting case. He lost in the end, over 30 sheep died. Some were shock. The farmer said they were prone to shock. But the big question was, what was shocking them?
Yeah.
So, anyway, carry on, Robert.
Robert, any notable cases, Robert, that you've worked on? We've literally got 7 or 8 minutes left.
Oh, crikey. Well, what, the animal cases, you mean?
Anything UFO related? Anything you want to tell us?
Oh, my goodness me.
You need 7 hours for Robert's.
I'm afraid you would take it. Would take,
well, Robert, just give us a brief outline and we can get you on here talking. It'd be great.
Well, basically, I've been an abductee, if you like, since I was a small child. And it's gone on all through my life. And it probably still goes on to this day. And
your parents and sister?
Sorry?
And your parents and sister?
Oh, yes. Yeah, my mum, both my sisters, my grandmother, we've all been taken. It runs in the family.
What age were you, Robert, when you first? I don't mean you wouldn't have realised it at 4 or 5 years old, but what age? What memories have you got?
Well, I mean, the first memory really is when I was about 2 years of age.
Really?
I was stood in the street. My mum had just gone back into my auntie's house to get my younger sister, and I stood there, and a light came down in the street and hovered in front of me. It was shaped like a big light bulb, and it hovered, I don't know, maybe about 6 feet off the ground, and just 6 feet away from me, and then it just disappeared, and that was the first thing. Then when I was 7, on holiday in North Wales at Prestatyn, both me and my sister, we were taken, and we were missing for 4 hours on that occasion. A couple of years later, on holiday once again at Llandudno in North Wales, just a bit further along the coast, Jane and I were taken from the digs in Llandudno, and we were put down by the sea, by the rocks, on the far side of Great Orme, which there's a road goes all the way around Great Orme, and then there's a wall, and then it drops down maybe 100 feet down to the sea. And we were right there down by the sea. We had to climb back up those rocks, the two of us.
And have you both got parallel memories of this?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely, both of us. Yeah.
And you just painted a brilliant picture earlier. 2 years old and this light in front of a little boy, and you really described it well, and it's fascinating.
Well, you never forget these things, Paul. You know, they're imprinted on my mind. I can even remember what the weather was like on that day. It was a still, damp, drizzly sort of day, no wind. It was an old cobble street with houses on either side.
So a load of cobbles then.
It was a load of cobbles. Yeah, that's right.
So, what about Mum and Dad then? Did you? Because I take it, if something like that were happening to you at 2, so we go 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Did they encourage that kind of talk with you, or did you not say anything? Or what age kind of thing did you start to relate these experiences?
Well, when you're that young, you don't realise what it is that's happening to you. And so when we were missing, when I was 7 and Jane was 5, and missing for 4 hours, I guess my parents thought that we'd been naughty, and so it wasn't until many years later, after I'd had other experiences and actually stood underneath a huge craft on the Macclesfield to Leek Road with my wife and 2 boys on the 28th of December 1980, which is the night of the Rendlesham Forest case. Right. And it wasn't until then that all these things that had happened to me in my younger life really started to make sense. And then I started to talk to my parents, well, my mum particularly, and it was then that she admitted that these things had been happening to her. And, like with the puncture marks, the scoop marks, the triangle marks, all these kind of things, which are typical,
So basically, Robert, you'd had no outside influence to shape these memories. And I'm not saying that's what happened. It's just everything that had happened to you had happened, and it weren't until you started telling your parents that you realised that they'd been having similar experiences. It's fascinating.
That's
Robert,
right. Yeah,
I'm got to cut you short here. We've got 2 minutes left, and I don't want you to go. Don't go. But
right,
we've got
I'll
Les
stay
on the screen, and we'll see what Les has got to say. We've got 2 minutes, and we just want to say goodbye to David as well, because he's given us just about 2 hours non-stop. David, honestly, I'm really grateful that you've given us your time, and
you're very welcome.
Is there any questions, or can you fit anything in, Les, before we go?
No, I'm sorry, and I've got to apologise to everybody who sent the questions in that we won't be able to get any more out today. But it's been an honour and a privilege to have David on the show tonight, as I'm sure you'll agree, Paul. And Robert.
It's been an honour to be on.
Brilliant. The last 10 minutes of the show. And
yeah,
I'm
good.
sure if, Robert, if we asked you to come on the show and tell us your stories, your accounts, would you do that?
Yes, of course I would. Yes,
That would
definitely.
be lovely. Yeah,
We'll
really
be in
enjoy that.
touch. We'll be in
Yeah.
touch. And yeah, so we've got to end it here. And thanks everybody for coming on to tonight's stream. If I can get my words out. Thank you for Sky and Alison for doing the moderating tonight. Thank you. We don't know what to do without you.
Love doing that.
Yeah. So it's goodbye from me.
All right, and thank you very much. Thank you, David, Robert, Les.
Pleasure.
Good night.
Good night.
Cheers. All the best.